Hello and welcome back to Era 4 of APUS History. In this final video for the unit, we will be looking at topic 4.13, the Society of the South in the Early Republic, looking at the geographic and environmental factors that set this region apart from the rest of the U.S., and how this region impacted the U.S. both economically and politically. So let's get started. At the outbreak of the American Revolution, slavery existed in all 13 colonies, but had been abolished in the northern states within a few years, leaving it to exist solely in the South, where it was referred to as the peculiar institution. Only about 1/3 of Southern families owned slaves, although it was almost half of families in the states of Mississippi and South Carolina. The vast majority of those, about 88%, owned fewer than 20 slaves, and almost half owned fewer than 5. It is important to know that Southerners supported the system of slavery whether they owned slaves or not. One of the reasons even non-slave-owning whites supported the slave system was because they held a belief in racial superiority of whites over blacks, and even those who were of mixed blood. Even the very poor Southern whites could look down on slaves who occupied a level in society that was beneath even them, and they generally wanted to preserve the system so that they would one day be able to join it, proving to themselves and to others that they were finally in the upper portion of Southern society. The reason for why slavery was so concentrated in the Southern states had to do with their climate, geography, and agricultural products. Cash crops like tobacco, rice, and cotton were the primary products because the climate and soil type was perfect for growing them. They needed long growing seasons and warm weather. As the textile industry expanded in New England and the North in general, Southern planters, spurred by the invention of the cotton gin by Eli Whitney, rushed to plant more and more cotton. Due to the differences in climate, cotton could not be grown in the Upper South, so the expansion of cotton production was almost exclusively happening in the Lower South. This is also part of the reason why Georgia landowners were so desperate to drive the Cherokee off their lands, since that was in the prime cotton-growing region. With more demand for slaves to work the new areas of cotton production, many planters in the Upper South began to sell off at least some of their slaves for the very high prices they could obtain in the Lower South. Also, many states, especially those away from the border with the North, did not allow emancipated slaves to remain within their boundaries, resulting in nearly all of the non-white population being enslaved in those Deep South states. In some cases, especially in the Deep South, like Mississippi, the majority of the overall population was living in slavery. Cotton became the key cash crop of the Southern economy and the most important American commodity overall. By 1850, of the 3.2 million slaves in the country's 15 slave states, 1.8 million were producing cotton. By 1860, slave labor was producing over 2 billion pounds of cotton per year. Northern mills depended on the South for supplies of raw cotton that was then converted into textiles. But this domestic cotton market paled in comparison to the Atlantic market. About 75% of the cotton produced in the U.S. was eventually exported abroad. Exporting at such high volumes made the U.S. the undisputed world leader in cotton production. Between the years 1820 and 1860, about 80% of the global cotton supply was produced in the U.S., nearly all of this exported cotton being shipped to Britain, fueling its textile industry and making the powerful British Empire increasingly dependent on American cotton and Southern slavery. By the time of the Civil War, South Carolina politician James Hammond had confidently proclaimed that the North could never threaten the South because, quote, cotton is king. But cotton, like tobacco, sapped the soil of nutrients. So many planters simply abandoned their fields every 10 to 15 years after the soil became exhausted, since they felt that new land available for cotton was limitless, which led to the expansion of the South westward, towards Louisiana, Arkansas, and eventually Texas. Even though they represented a small percentage of the families that owned slaves, the planter elite dominated Southern society and politics. They convinced the rest of the South that slavery was necessary for the South's economic success. Poor whites at the bottom of the social hierarchy supported slavery because they hoped to one day attain the type of wealth that would allow them to purchase enslaved people, and they didn't want slavery to be abolished before that happened. To keep this system going, the elites of Southern society supported an idea of white supremacy. John C. Calhoun, who had been vice president and then a senator from South Carolina, once said, quote, "I hold that in the present state of civilization, where two races of different origin and distinguished by color and other physical differences, as well as intellectual, are brought together, the relation now existing in the slaveholding states between the two is, instead of an evil, a good, a positive good. There never has yet existed a wealthy and civilized society in which one portion of the community did not, in point of fact, live on the labor of the other. Broad and general as is this assertion, it is fully borne out by history. I fearlessly assert that the existing relation between the two races in the South, against which these blind fanatics are waging war, forms the most solid and durable foundation on which to rear free and stable political institutions." Unquote. Essentially, Calhoun is justifying slavery on both economic grounds and moral grounds. The mastery of the white race over the black race, he argued, is what was holding Southern society together. And with that kind of ideology taking root in the South, the planter elite forged bonds with the lower white classes, establishing a stronghold on Southern culture. They also had more influence at the national level than they should otherwise have held. The 3/5 Compromise, back when the Constitution was written, gave white Southerners more representation in Congress than they would have otherwise had. And the Electoral College system also gave more political power to smaller population states, which, compared to the industrializing North, the South was significantly smaller. The goal of Congress to preserve the balance of power between the regions since the passage of the Missouri Compromise in 1820 gave the Southern states a strong bargaining power. And after the passage of the Compromise of 1850 and the admission of California as a free state, breaking that balance of power permanently, the South became much less willing to compromise on any issue, setting up the Sectional Crisis of the 1850s. Well, that's what you need to know about topic 4.13, the Society of the South in the Early Republic. Keep up with your reading, and I'll see you in the next time period.